It only took one night to unravel everything I thought I knew about reality. One night to confront the horrifying truth that everything we've ever known could be a lie, a myth. One night to stare into the void and realize that nothing is fixed, that impossibilities are just waiting for their moment. All it took was a visit to a small forgotten motel. And now I'm sitting here, trembling, waiting to die. It started when I arrived in Black Rock, New Mexico, earlier than planned. A day earlier than my parents expected me. They were supposed to return from Vegas that evening, but my rescheduled meetings brought me to their new hometown ahead of schedule. I hadn't seen them in years, and though Santa Fe wasn't far from Black Rock, I had left for the East Coast long ago. I had no key to their new home and no options in a town as small as Black Rock, so I resigned myself to sleeping in my car. It was late, and exhaustion clawed at me. Just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed violently, piercing the silence. "Hello?" I mumbled groggy, barely awake. "Frank, sorry, we couldn't make it back earlier." It was my dad's voice, familiar but distant, like he was calling from a tunnel. The speakerphone quality distorted him, but I brushed it off. "It's okay, Dad. How are you guys? Was the trip fun?" My voice perked up slightly, the excitement of hearing him overshadowing my fatigue. "Oh, we're great, Frank. Just great." His words were almost too enthusiastic, and something about his tone didn't sit right. "Listen, I can't bear the thought of you sleeping in your car. There's a motel just north of town, the Everett. It's not exactly the Ritz, but it's new and should have vacancies." Relieved but wary, I asked, "Thanks, Dad. How's Mom? Can I talk to her?" "She's great, Frank. Just great." His voice wavered slightly, then continued, "I can't bear the thought of you sleeping in your car." My heart skipped a beat. He had already said that. "Dad, you just mentioned that." "Oh, did I?" His voice sounded farther away now, quieter, almost swallowed by static. "Go to the Everett Motel. There's a vacancy." Before I could respond, the call abruptly ended. The line went dead, leaving me in silence that felt heavier than before. Shaking off the unease, I decided to follow his suggestion. The Everett Motel was about a mile and a half out, tucked in the middle of nowhere. Its appearance matched its desolation-faded, rusty green sign and all. For a new motel, it looked like it had been standing there for decades, weathered and forgotten. But the vacancy sign glared at me in blood-red neon, unrelenting. The parking lot was eerily sparse. A few cars dotted the lot, a black Mercedes, a beat-up red Ford pickup, a green Honda Civic, and a white Chevy Malibu. Each looked like it had been abandoned long ago, their surfaces dulled by dust. My shiny rental car stood out like a beacon of unwelcome presence. As I stepped into the office, the clang of a bell echoed unnaturally in the stillness. Behind the counter stood a man young, pale, and too cheerful. His grin stretched across his face unnervingly wide, his eyes almost unblinking. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Everett," he said, his voice chipper but somehow wrong, as though it were rehearsed, hollow, like a recording playing on a loop. Something wasn't right. I felt it immediately, but it was too late to turn back. The kid at the motel counter didn't seem out of the ordinary, at first polite enough, with a too-wide grin plastered across his face. He ignored my tired attempt at small talk and just kept smiling. I didn't care to push the conversation. All I wanted was a bed. "I'll take any room," I muttered, barely meeting his unnervingly bright eyes. "Would you like a double or to die?" he asked, his grin stretching even wider. My stomach dropped. "What did you just say?" He blinked, the smile fading into a polite frown. "I asked if you'd like a double or a queen, sir." For a moment, I stood frozen. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I dismissed it as exhaustion messing with my head. "A queen," I replied. He swiped my credit card without a word, handed me the key, and wished me a good night with a cheerfulness that felt more like mockery. As I stepped outside, the chill of the desert night settled into my skin. I paused in the lot, glancing around. My car was now parked beside an ancient El Camino, so rusted it looked like it might crumble if you so much as touched it. Its presence felt ominous, even. The lot had seemed different just minutes ago, but I was too tired to think straight. Room 2 was mine, just past room 1, where muffled laughter and a blaring TV spilled into the night. Kids, I thought. Great. I braced myself for screaming and stomping in the early hours. Sliding the key into the lock, I felt a sharp jolt. I yelped and snatched my hand back, staring at my fingers. What kind of place was this? My thoughts raced as I tried the lock again, this time without a shock, and stepped into the room. The interior was outdated, cheesy, tacky, and garish. Bright orange flower patterns sprawled across every surface like a fever dream from the 90s, but I didn't care. I flung the sheets back, collapsed onto the mattress, and welcomed the pull of sleep. Just as I began to drift off, a voice whispered from the other side of the wall. "Nice Mercedes you got there." My eyes snapped open. My pulse quickened. Maybe I imagined it. Deciding to ignore it, I closed my eyes again. I said, "Nice Mercedes you got there." The voice was louder this time, sharp and invasive. Annoyed, I called back, "Thanks, but I'm trying to sleep. We can chat in the morning." Silence. I sighed, thinking that was the end of it. Then it came again this time, a shout. "Nice Mercedes you got there, bud." I bolted upright, fury eclipsing my fear. "Sir, I'm trying to sleep. Can you stop yelling about my car?" I yelled back, but the voice didn't respond. Frustrated, I stormed out into the cool night, pounding on the door of room 1. A groggy, middle-aged man answered, his eyes heavy with sleep. He looked genuinely confused as I confronted him. "Can you stop yelling about my car?" I demanded. He rubbed his eyes, looking more baffled than anything. "I haven't said a word all night," he muttered, closing the door on me. As I turned to head back to my room, something caught my eye. The lot had changed. The green Honda Civic was now parked where my car had been, and the rusted El Camino had swapped places. My stomach churned. Why would they switch spots? I muttered to myself. Shaking it off as some prank, I stormed back into my room, collapsing onto the bed. I glanced at the clock, 1:48 a.m. Sleep came reluctantly, only to be shattered by a deafening bang. I shot upright, heart pounding, and glanced at the clock again, 2:44 am. Scanning the room, I saw nothing out of place. Flipping on the light, I prepared to investigate. Another bang echoed through the night, louder this time, making my chest tighten. Then, from the wall came the voice again, low and mocking. "Nice Chevy you got there." The pounding on the man's door felt futile, but I couldn't stop myself. My knuckles thudded against the wood, echoing down the eerily silent hallway. This time, there was no answer. Frustrated, I glanced back at the parking lot. My breath hitched. The white Chevy Malibu was now parked where my Mercedes had been. My stomach twisted as I scanned the lot, quickly spotting my car parked in the space where the beat-up pickup had been. My pulse quickened. Every car in the lot had been rearranged, and I hadn't heard a single engine. Ignoring the chill running up my spine, I stormed back to the man's door, pounding harder than before. No response. I decided to confront the manager. Marching to the front office, I furiously rang the desk bell until a groggy old man shuffled out from the back room. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp as they studied me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone heavy with irritation. I explained everything about the man in room 3, the voices, and the shifting cars. The old man frowned, his expression growing more concerned with every word. Finally, he sighed and said, "The cars haven't moved at all, sir. And room 3 is vacant." I froze. "No," I said firmly. "That's impossible." But he insisted, and I demanded he follow me. Together, we walked out into the lot. To my utter disbelief, the cars were back in their original spots. My Mercedes sat exactly where I had parked it earlier. The old man gave me a cautious look, unlocking room 3 with a master key. The door creaked open, revealing a space that was entirely empty. No furniture, no sounds, no signs of life. Just stale air and peeling wallpaper. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said, his tone soft. "It must have been a dream." I stammered an apology, feeling like a fool, and he left with a kind but wary smile. Back in my room, I decided to shower, hoping the water would clear my head. The clock read 2:30 a.m., and I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been dreaming. I stepped into the warm spray, letting it wash over me. Then, faintly, I heard it. The TV in the next room blared to life. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling, no response. Peering through the shower curtain, I tried to make out the room beyond the cracked bathroom door, but the steam obscured everything. "Hello?" I called again, stepping out of the shower and wrapping a towel around my waist. I moved cautiously to the doorway, the tile cold beneath my feet. Standing in the middle of the room was the young man who had checked me in. "What the hell are you doing in here?" I demanded, anger masking the unease in my voice. He tilted his head, his face a mask of confusion. "I can't be in here," he said with a shrug, his voice far too calm. "No, you can't. Get out." I snapped. He took a step forward, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. "But isn't this my room too?" Something inside me snapped. I lunged toward him, but he moved faster than I expected, shoving me back into the bathroom. The door slammed shut, and I heard him laughing, a low, guttural sound that turned my blood to ice. I threw the door open, ready to fight, but froze in place. The room was upside down. The bed, the TV, my luggage, all of it hung above me, suspended in midair as if gravity had reversed. I stood on the ceiling, staring up at my belongings as panic gripped me. "This isn't real," I muttered, slapping my face, pinching my arm, doing anything to wake myself up. Nothing worked. Then I felt it. The sensation of falling. I hit the ground with a jarring thud, the wind knocked out of me. Gasping for air, I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the floor beside my bed. Everything was normal. The room was right side up. The clock read 2:50 a.m. It was just a dream, I told myself. A bad dream. But my nerves were shot, and I desperately needed a cigarette. Grabbing my keys, I stepped outside. The night air was crisp and biting as I made my way to the car. Pressing the unlock button, I reached for the handle, only to find myself staring at the door of a green Honda Civic. My Mercedes was gone. I pressed the unlock button on my Mercedes key fob again, watching the Honda Civic's doors click open. My chest tightened as I scanned the parking lot for my car. There it was, or what should have been it, parked across from where the Ford once sat. I jogged over, my pulse hammering in my ears. The key fob in my hand felt heavy, foreign. I pressed the button again, but my Mercedes stayed locked. Behind me, I heard the soft click of the Honda unlocking once more. "Haven't you figured it out yet?" The voice was calm, almost amused. I spun around, heart in my throat, to see the young man who had checked me in. He stood there, smiling that same wide, ridiculous grin, swinging my Mercedes keys casually around his finger. "That's your car now," he said, his tone mocking. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, stepping closer. "This is my car. What did you do?" He shrugged, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. "Nothing, sir," he said with feigned innocence, still swinging the keys. I glanced down at my hand, and my stomach dropped. The keys I held were no longer for my Mercedes. They were for the Honda. I looked back up and he had taken a few steps back, still smiling, still swinging the keys. "Give those back," I growled. "I'm calling the cops." His smile deepened, and then it began. His mouth stretched farther than humanly possible, splitting his face open like a grotesque wound. The grin grew impossibly large, his teeth vanishing into an endless void of blackness. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself. What are you?" I whispered. He stepped forward, His movements jerky and exaggerated, like a puppet on strings. His legs stretched unnaturally with each step, growing longer and more distorted, as if reality itself were twisting to accommodate his grotesque form. Panicking, I turned and ran. My shoes slapped against the pavement, but the sound felt muffled, distant. I risked a glance back and froze mid-stride. He was still behind me, his body looming impossibly tall, his steps spanning the parking lot in absurd, cartoonish bounds. I whipped my head forward, desperate to escape, and slammed directly into him. I fell backward, landing hard on the asphalt. Dazed, I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. His face loomed over me, a horrifying blend of features. The young man's face was still there, but layered atop it, like a transparent mask, was the wrinkled visage of the old man from the front desk. Both faces existed simultaneously, shifting and flickering in and out of focus, yet neither overshadowed the other. "You're not real," I stammered, my voice barely a squeak. ... He leaned closer, his mouth stretching impossibly wide once more. As I stared into the abyss of his grin, I saw something moving within letters. Words, entire sentences spilling out, twisting and spinning in the darkness like scraps of paper caught in a whirlwind. "Do you believe in reality, Frank?" he asked. The voice wasn't just his anymore. It was mine. It was my father's. It was the voices of strangers I'd spoken to, all layered and discordant. I don't know," I whimpered. The letters spilling from his mouth began to coalesce, forming sharp, jagged shapes that hovered in the air around me. Words I'd spoken, words others had said to me, all floating, twisting, becoming solid. "Nice Mercedes you've got there," one phrase sneered, the letters snapping together like teeth. "I'm trying to sleep," another mocked, the words circling me like vultures. The creature leaned in closer, its two sets of eyes piercing through me. "Do you know why you're here, Frank?" "No," I choked out, the letters of my response falling from my mouth and scattering like broken glass. "Because I asked you to come," it said, its voice shifting into the distorted echo of the phone call I'd received earlier. "Because I like you." The words around me multiplied, their weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every sound I'd heard, every word I'd spoken, now crushed me beneath their weight. I clawed at the ground, gasping for air, as the creature's mouth opened wider, and a deafening cacophony of voices poured out. I was drowning in my own words, suffocating beneath the weight of every conversation, every memory. Am I dying? The letters swirled faster, pulling me into the blackness. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to block out the chaos. When I finally dared to open them, everything had gone silent. I was sitting in my Mercedes on the side of an empty road. The night was unnervingly still, the air thick with an unnatural quiet. I looked around, heart pounding, but there was no sign of the motel, no trace of it at all. Just the dark, endless stretch of asphalt under my tires. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling, and checked the time. 1:28 a.m. Was it all a dream? I checked my GPS, and my stomach churned. Somehow I was 1.5 miles north of Black Rock. But why? If it had all been a dream, why was I here? What had brought me to this desolate place? My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. I glanced at the screen. One new text message. The sender was blank. The message read, "Nice reality you got there." I froze, my blood turning to ice. My hands tightened around the phone, and I scanned my surroundings again. The road stretched into the void, empty and unchanging. I never saw the Everett Motel again. When I returned to Black Rock, I tried asking about it, desperate for answers. But no one had ever heard of such a place. No one knew what I was talking about. They looked at me like I was insane. I called the number that had sent the text, but it didn't exist. Every attempt to trace the motel's location ended the same way, with nothing. It was as if it had never been there. But I know what I saw. I don't understand it. Maybe I never will. Maybe I wasn't even in our reality that night. Now I sit here, questioning everything, waiting, wondering. Each day feels like a fragile thread, tethering me to this world, this version of reality. So far, nothing has changed. I've stayed here in this familiar yet uncertain existence, but I can't shake the feeling that someday it will happen again. When it does, I know it'll be waiting for me. And so I sit here, not fearing death, but hoping for it. Praying that when death comes, it comes in this reality. Because if it doesn't, I don't know where I'll end up.